"This is where you're taking me for my 70th birthday, this cheap hole in the wall," my mother-in-law Margaret announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, her voice dripping with the particular contempt she reserved for anything connected to me. I told David we should have gone to the country club, but no, his wife insisted on this dump. "Look at these tablecloths. Look at these chairs. My book club wouldn't be caught dead here." My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me while the other diners glanced our way with secondhand embarrassment, and I maintained the serene smile I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage to her son. But why did I simply nod and promise to speak with the manager, and why did Margaret's confident expression collapse into confusion when the executive chef emerged from the kitchen, kissed my cheek, and asked, "What do you want me to do, boss?" "There seems to be a complaint about the service," I said calmly. "Mrs. Patterson is unhappy with her experience." Chef Antonio Reyes looked at Margaret with professional concern. "I'm so sorry to hear that. What can we do to make your evening more comfortable, Mrs. Patterson?" Margaret was staring between us, processing the kiss, the title, the deference. "Boss," she repeated. "Did he just call you boss?" "He did." I gestured to the elegant dining room around us, the subtle lighting, the carefully curated artwork, the table spaced for intimate conversation. "Welcome to Luminera, Margaret. My restaurant. The cheap hole in the wall, you've been eating it every month for 3 years without realizing who owned it." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible. You can't, you work at that little catering company. I own a hospitality group. 3 restaurants, a catering division, and a culinary consulting firm." I smiled. "The little catering company you've been dismissing for 8 years is worth approximately $12 million. This location alone has 2 Michelin stars." Margaret sat down heavily in the chair she'd just criticized. 2 Michelin stars? 2 Michelin stars. The waiting list for reservations is 4 months. Tonight, your entire party of 16 is eating for free, because I wanted my mother-in-law to experience something special for her 70th birthday. I paused. Though I'm starting to reconsider the free part. The history between Margaret and me stretched back to the moment David had introduced us. "She works with food," David had explained to his mother, the phrasing carefully vague. "A caterer?" Margaret had asked, her tone suggesting caterers ranked somewhere between house cleaners and the people who collected garbage. "Something like that." The conversation had established the dynamic that would persist for 8 years. Margaret had decided I was beneath her son, a working-class girl with a service industry job, unworthy of joining the Patterson family of lawyers and physicians. I hadn't corrected her misconception. Partly because David and I had agreed to keep my business separate from family politics. Partly because Margaret's disapproval was so comprehensive that accurate information wouldn't have changed it. Partly because, if I was being honest, watching her unknowingly enjoy my restaurants for years had its own satisfaction. Luminera had been my second restaurant, opened 5 years into our marriage. The first, a small farm-to-table concept called Harvest, had established my reputation in the local food scene. When it received critical acclaim and began generating substantial profit, I'd expanded into fine dining with Luminera. The restaurant had been an immediate success, innovative tasting menus, locally sourced ingredients, a wine program that attracted serious collectors. Within 2 years, we'd earned our first Michelin star. The second had followed 18 months later. Throughout this success, Margaret had remained oblivious. She'd eaten at Luminera 7 times that I knew of, always for book club dinners or ladies' lunches. She'd praised the food, the service, the atmosphere, while simultaneously disparaging my career to anyone who would listen. "My daughter-in-law works in food service," she'd tell her friends with condescending pity. "She caters events. It's fine for some people, I suppose." Those friends had often eaten at my restaurants without making the connection. The culinary world and Margaret's social world overlapped without her awareness. Until tonight. David had known about the revelation I'd planned. "Are you sure about this?" he'd asked when I'd proposed hosting Margaret's birthday at Luminera. "She's been insulting my career for 8 years. She's been eating at my restaurants without acknowledging their quality because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging me. Tonight, she'll have to face what she's been dismissing. She'll be humiliated. She's spent 8 years humiliating me. A single evening of realization seems proportionate. What if it damages the relationship permanently?" "What relationship?" "She tolerates me because you married me. She doesn't respect me, doesn't value me, doesn't see me as part of the family. Maybe this will change something. Maybe it won't. But I'm done pretending not to notice her contempt." David had agreed reluctantly, understanding my frustration even as he worried about the fallout. The birthday dinner proceeded with an atmosphere of stunned recalibration. Margaret's 15 other guests, sisters, cousins, longtime friends, had also been unaware of my connection to Luminera. They'd chosen the restaurant for Margaret's celebration based on its reputation, never connecting it to the daughter-in-law Margaret consistently dismissed. "You own this place?" Margaret's sister Barbara asked, looking around with new eyes. "I do. Along with 2 other restaurants and a catering company. But Margaret always said you worked at a little catering business." Margaret says many things that aren't accurate. It's not my responsibility to correct every misconception she chooses to maintain. Margaret herself had recovered enough to speak. "Why didn't you tell me? You never asked. You decided within 5 minutes of meeting me what I was worth, and you've never updated that assessment." I sat down at the head of the table, my table, in my restaurant. "Every time I tried to discuss my work, you changed the subject or made dismissive comments. Eventually, I stopped trying. I would have been interested. Would you? When I mentioned opening my second location, you said, 'That's nice,' and asked David about his cases. When I won the Rising Chef Award, you didn't respond to the email I sent. When this restaurant received its first Michelin star, you told David it was a shame Vivian can't find a more stable career. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. That's different." The courses arrived throughout the evening, each one more exquisite than the last. Chef Antonio had designed a special tasting menu for the occasion: delicate amuse-bouches, perfectly composed salads, proteins cooked with precision, desserts that balanced innovation with comfort. Margaret ate in silence for most of the meal, her earlier complaints forgotten in the face of food that contradicted every assumption she'd made. "This is extraordinary," Barbara said after the fish course. "I've eaten here 3 times and somehow missed that it was connected to the family." "Vivian prefers keeping her professional life separate," David said carefully. "We don't advertise the connection. But the quality, Margaret, you've been here before. Surely you noticed." "I noticed the food was good." Margaret's voice was stiff. "I didn't know my daughter-in-law was responsible." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "Would you have praised the restaurant less if you'd known I owned it?" Margaret didn't answer. We both knew the answer was yes. The cake was served after the entrees, a custom creation from my pastry chef, layers of dark chocolate and raspberry with edible flowers spelling, "Happy 70th. "This is too beautiful to eat," one of Margaret's friends commented. "Elena spent 6 hours on it," I said. "She'll be disappointed if you don't destroy it completely." The attempt at levity fell flat with Margaret, though her friends chuckled politely. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To Margaret, on her 70th birthday. May this next decade bring clarity, about family, about value, about the people who've been quietly building something meaningful while being dismissed as unworthy." The words were pointed enough to register without being openly hostile. Margaret's friends shifted uncomfortably. David gave me a warning look. To Margaret, the table echoed uncertainly. After dinner, Margaret asked to speak with me privately. We stepped onto the restaurant's small patio, where carefully maintained plants created an urban garden atmosphere. "You planned this," she said. "This whole evening was designed to humiliate me. I planned a beautiful birthday dinner at one of the city's best restaurants. You humiliated yourself by loudly calling it a cheap hole in the wall, before you even tasted the food, because I didn't know. Because you didn't look. Because you assumed that anything connected to me must be inferior. Because your prejudice against my background blinded you to what was right in front of you. I never said you were inferior. You've implied it for 8 years. Every time you asked about my little catering business with that condescending tone. Every time you suggested David could have done better. Every time you introduced me as my son's wife, without including my name. That's not. It is. I have the memories, Margaret. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment when you made clear I wasn't what you wanted for your son. Tonight was supposed to be a gift, a chance to celebrate your birthday with exceptional food and service. Instead, you chose to insult my work before giving it a chance." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I genuinely didn't know this was your restaurant. Would knowing have changed your behavior?" I don't know. That's an honest answer, at least." I looked out at the city lights beyond the patio. "I'm not asking you to love me, Margaret. I'm asking you to see me. To acknowledge that I'm a competent professional who's built something meaningful. To stop treating me as an embarrassment to the Patterson family." "I never said you were an embarrassment. You called my restaurant a cheap hole in the wall in front of your entire guest list. You've dismissed my career as working with food for 8 years. You've suggested to David multiple times that he married beneath himself." I turned to face her. At what point does the cumulative evidence become undeniable? The conversation didn't resolve anything immediately. Margaret wasn't capable of instant transformation, too many years of assumptions, too much pride invested in her version of reality. But something had cracked. The certainty she'd maintained about my inadequacy had collided with evidence she couldn't dismiss. "I need time to process this," she said finally. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Neither is my restaurant, my company, or my marriage to your son. I didn't mean to hurt you. Intent and impact are different things. You may not have meant to spend 8 years making me feel unwelcome in your family. But you did. Meaning to or not doesn't erase the effect. We returned to the table separately, Margaret needing a moment to compose herself, me needing a moment to release the tension I'd been carrying. The birthday dinner ended more quietly than it had begun. Margaret's friends seemed uncertain how to navigate the revelation, praising the food while side-eyeing the family drama they witnessed. Some approached me privately to express appreciation for the meal, carefully avoiding commentary on the larger situation. This was lovely, Barbara told me as she left. I'm sorry for what Margaret said earlier. She doesn't always think before she speaks. She thinks plenty. She just doesn't filter her thoughts when she believes she's superior. Barbara winced but didn't disagree. David and I drove home in contemplative silence. That was intense, he finally said. It was necessary. Was it? We could have continued. Continued what? Another 8 years of pretending not to notice her contempt? Another decade of hiding my success because it might upset her worldview? I shook my head. I've built something I'm proud of. I shouldn't have to minimize it to protect your mother's ego. I'm not saying you should minimize it. I'm saying the birthday dinner was a specific choice, a public revelation designed for maximum impact. Your mother insulted my restaurant publicly before she even sat down. The impact was already happening. I just redirected it. David fell silent again. You're angry, I observed. I don't know what I am. I wanted you to have this moment, you've earned it. But watching my mother realize she's been wrong for 8 years was uncomfortable. Imagine how uncomfortable I've been for 8 years, knowing she was wrong and being unable to correct her without causing a scene. That's fair. Is it? Because right now, I feel like you're more concerned about her discomfort than about what she's done to me. That's not true. Isn't it? You've always positioned yourself as neutral, as the mediator between us. But neutral isn't the same as fair. Neutral means tolerating her behavior while asking me to be patient. We pulled into our driveway before David could respond. I love you, he said as I reached for the door. And I'm proud of what you've built. I need time to sort through my feelings about tonight. Take the time. But understand that I'm done protecting your mother from reality. She's an adult. She can handle learning that her assumptions were wrong. Can she? That's her problem, not mine. The aftermath of the birthday dinner unfolded over several weeks. Margaret didn't call me directly, but she called David repeatedly. The conversations were audible from the next room, her voice rising and falling with emotion, his responses careful and measured. She's embarrassed, he reported after one call. She says she feels like everyone was laughing at her. No one laughed at her. People were surprised, maybe uncomfortable, but no one mocked her. She says it felt like mockery. Her feelings about what happened and what actually happened are different things. I can't control her interpretations. The first direct contact came 3 weeks later. Margaret invited me to lunch, not at Luminera, but at the country club she'd originally wanted for her birthday. The symbolism was obvious, she was reasserting control over the territory, choosing ground where she felt comfortable. I accepted anyway. The country club dining room was exactly as I'd expected, traditional to the point of dated, competent but uninspired food, wait staff who'd been there for decades. It was the kind of establishment that valued familiarity over innovation. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Margaret said after we'd ordered. And I owe you an apology. Not just for the birthday dinner, for years of assumptions I shouldn't have made. What assumptions specifically? That you weren't good enough for David. That your career was somehow less valid than traditional professions. That you didn't belong in our family. What changed your mind? Seeing your restaurant. Eating the food. Watching how your staff looked at you, with respect, with loyalty. Realizing that the little catering business I'd been dismissing is actually a successful enterprise that employs dozens of people. All of that was true before you saw it. I told you about achievements over the years. You chose not to believe me. I know. I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining what finally penetrated my stubbornness. The apology was more comprehensive than I'd expected. Margaret walked through specific incidents, times she'd been dismissive, comments she'd made, ways she'd treated me as less than her biological daughters. She acknowledged the pattern, took responsibility for it, and expressed genuine remorse. I can't undo 8 years, she said. But I'd like to do better going forward. If you'll let me. What does better look like to you? Asking about your work and actually listening. Treating you as an equal member of the family. Acknowledging your achievements to my friends instead of minimizing them. That sounds like a significant change. It is. I've spent 70 years being set in my ways. Change is uncomfortable. She met my eyes. But my discomfort is less important than being fair to you. I considered her words carefully. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer immediately, too many years of accumulated hurt, too much damage from sustained dismissal. But Margaret was trying, genuinely trying, and that deserved acknowledgement. I appreciate the apology. It's more than I expected. But trust takes time to rebuild. You've spent 8 years establishing one kind of relationship. Changing that won't happen overnight. I understand. I hope so. Because if this is just a performance, if you go back to the condescension the moment you comfortable again, it will be worse than if you never apologized at all. It's not a performance. Then prove it. Not today, not next week, but over months and years. Show me through actions that you actually see me as family. Margaret's transformation wasn't perfect. Old habits occasionally resurfaced, moments of condescension, reflexive assumptions that had to be caught and corrected. But she was trying. Genuinely, consistently trying. She visited Harvest, my original restaurant, and asked questions about how I'd started. She attended the opening of my third location and gave a toast to my talented daughter-in-law. She stopped introducing me as David's wife and started using my name. Your mother called today, I told David one evening. About what? She wanted recommendations for a catering company. One of her friends is planning an event. Did you give her your information? She asked specifically for someone else. Said she didn't want to create complicated family dynamics by hiring me. David raised an eyebrow. That seems backward. That's what I said. She told me she was trying to respect my professional boundaries, not assuming she could use our family relationship for business advantages. That's actually thoughtful. It is. I appreciated it. The first anniversary of the birthday dinner revelation passed without drama. Margaret's 71st birthday was celebrated at Harvest, my choice again, but this time without the confrontational undercurrents. She arrived knowing exactly what the restaurant was, who owned it, and why her daughter-in-law had built something worthy of celebration. Thank you for hosting this, she said as the evening wound down. Thank you for giving the food a fair chance this time. She laughed, a genuine sound, unburdened by the defensiveness that had characterized our earlier interactions. I deserved that. I was awful last year. You were. But you've been better since. That's what matters now. The relationship that emerged from the revelation wasn't the warm, close mother-daughter bond that some families achieve. We'd both carried too many years of baggage, accumulated too many hurts that couldn't be fully erased. But we'd built something functional, something respectful, something that no longer required me to minimize my success or pretend not to notice her contempt. Margaret had learned to see me, not as the inferior girl who'd married her son, but as a professional who'd built something meaningful. The Michelin stars, the successful locations, the employment of dozens of people who depended on my vision, all of it had finally penetrated her resistance. And I had learned to give her credit for changing, even if that change had required dramatic revelation to begin. Chef Antonio asked me once why I'd kept my ownership hidden from Margaret for so long. She needed to learn for herself, I said. If I'd told her directly, she would have dismissed it as exaggeration. Seeing it, experiencing the food, the service, the quality, forced her to confront reality. But you could have revealed it sooner. I could have. But sooner would have felt like bragging. Later felt like education. And the birthday dinner? That was revenge. I smiled slightly. Not proud revenge, maybe. But satisfying revenge. She'd spent 8 years calling my work inferior. Watching her realize she'd been eating at my cheap hole in the wall for 3 years and praising it, that was worth the wait. The hospitality group continued to grow. 2 more locations opened in the years following Margaret's revelation, a casual concept that made my cooking accessible to more people, and a rooftop venue that became the city's premier event space. Margaret attended both openings as an invited guest, not as an obligation. She brought friends, recommended the restaurants to her social circle, and took genuine pride in being associated with the success. My daughter-in-law owns this place, I'd overhear her telling people. Not my son's wife. Not someone who works with food. My daughter-in-law. Owner. Creator. Family. 8 years of dismissal hadn't been erased by one birthday dinner. But the dinner had created a rupture in Margaret's carefully maintained worldview, a crack through which reality could finally enter. The woman who'd spent years not seeing me had been forced to open her eyes. What she saw had surprised her. What she'd learned about herself had humbled her. And what came after, the apology, the effort, the gradual rebuilding, had created something better than what we'd had before. Not perfect. Not the warm relationship I'd wanted when I married David. But real. Honest. Built on mutual acknowledgement rather than sustained pretense. She called my restaurant a cheap hole in the wall in front of 16 guests at her own birthday dinner. She demanded to speak to the owner about the disgusting service. When the chef came out and called me boss, when I revealed that I'd owned this 2 Michelin-star establishment for 3 years while she ate here unknowingly, when the daughter-in-law she dismissed as working with food turned out to be a $12 million hospitality entrepreneur, her world shifted. 8 years of assumptions collapsed in one evening. She'd been enjoying my cooking, praising my restaurants, celebrating at my venues, while simultaneously dismissing my career to anyone who would listen. The revelation wasn't kind. It was necessary. And what came after, the apology, the effort, the gradual recognition that I'd always been more than she allowed herself to see, was worth the 8 years of waiting.